President proclaimed after 9/11, or to our curious inability to communicate our true intentions. A New York Times headline reads, U.S. fails to explain policies to Muslim world, panel says, referring to a study by the Defense Science Board, a Pentagon advisory panel, in December 2004. The conclusions of the panel, however, were quite different. Muslims do not hate our freedom, but rather they hate our policies, the study concluded, adding that when American public diplomacy talks about bringing democracy to Islamic societies, this is seen as no more than self-serving hypocrisy. As Muslims see it, the report continues, American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq has not led to democracy there, but only more chaos and suffering. The Defense Science Board study was reiterating conclusions that go back many years. In 1958, President Eisenhower puzzled about the campaign of hatred against us in the Arab world, not by the governments, but by the people, who are on Nasser's side, supporting independent secular nationalism. The reasons for the campaign of hatred were outlined by the National Security Council. In the eyes of the majority of Arabs, the United States appears to be opposed to the realization of the goals of Arab nationalism. They believe that the United States is seeking to protect its interest in Near East oil by supporting the status quo and opposing political or economic progress. Much the same was found by the Wall Street Journal when it surveyed the opinions of moneyed Muslims immediately after 9/11. Bankers, professionals, businessmen, committed to official Western values and embedded in the neoliberal globalization project, were dismayed by Washington's support for harsh authoritarian states and the barriers it erects against development and democracy, by propping up oppressive regimes. They had new grievances, however, beyond those reported by the National Security Council in 1958. Washington's sanctions regime in Iraq and its support for Israel's military occupation and takeover of the territories. There was no survey of the great mass of poor and suffering people, but it is likely that their sentiments are more intense, coupled with bitter resentment of the Western-oriented elites and the corrupt and brutal rulers backed by Western power, who ensure that the enormous wealth of the region flows to the West, apart from enriching themselves. The Iraq invasion only heightened these feelings, much as anticipated. Writing about the same 2004 Defense Science Board study, David Gardner observes, and for the most part, Arabs plausibly believe it was Osama bin Laden who smashed the status quo, not George W. Bush, because the 9/11 attacks made it impossible for the West and its Arab despot clients to continue to ignore a political setup that incubated blind rage against them. Saudi Shiites share that belief, as the New York Times reported. The evidence concerning Washington's actual stance and role, virtuous declarations aside, is clear and compelling, surely by the standards of complex world affairs. Nonetheless, it is always possible that Washington's actions might have an incidental positive effect. It is hard to predict the consequences of striking a system as delicate and complex as a society with a bludgeon. This is often true of even the worst crimes. As noted, Osama bin Laden's atrocities are reported to have had a positive effect in spurring democratization in the Arab world. The terrible crimes of Imperial Japan led to the expulsion of the European invaders from Asia, saving many millions of lives. In India, for example, which has been spared horrifying famines since the British withdrew, and was able to begin to recover from centuries of imperial domination. Perhaps what many Iraqis and others see as another Mongol invasion will end up having positive consequences as well, though it would be disgraceful for privileged Westerners to leave that possibility to chance. The persistence of the strong line of continuity to the present again reveals that the United States is very much like other powerful states, pursuing the strategic and economic interests of dominant sectors to the accompaniment of rhetorical flourishes about its exceptional dedication to the highest values. It should come as no surprise that the evidence for Washington's dedication to the proclaimed messianic mission reduces to routine pronouncements, or that the counter-evidence is mountainous. The reaction to these facts is of no slight significance for those concerned with the state of U.S. democracy, as noted at the outset. Abroad, democracy is fine, as long as it takes the top-down form that does not risk popular interference with primary interests in power and wealth. Much the same doctrine holds internally, a topic to which we now turn. Chapter 6. Democracy Promotion at Home. The concept of democracy promotion at home may seem odd or even absurd. After all, the United States was the first modern, more or less, democratic society, and has been a model for others ever since, and in many dimensions crucial for authentic democracy, protection of freedom of speech, for example. It has become a leader among the societies of the world. There are, however, quite good reasons for concern, some already mentioned. The concern is not unfamiliar. The most prominent scholar who concentrates on democratic theory and practice, Robert Dahl, has written on seriously undemocratic features of the U.S. political system, proposing modifications. Thomas Ferguson's investment theory of politics is a searching critique of deeper institutional factors that sharply restrict functioning democracy. The same is true of Robert McChesney's investigations of the role of the media in undermining democratic politics, to the extent that by the year 2000, presidential elections had become a travesty, he concludes, with a reciprocal effect on deterioration of media quality and service to the public interest. Subversion of democracy by concentrations of private power is, of course, familiar. Mainstream commentators casually observe that business is in complete control of the machinery of government. Robert Reich, echoing Woodrow Wilson's observation days before he took office, that the masters of the government of the United States are the combined capitalists and manufacturers of the United States. America's leading 20th century social philosopher John Dewey concluded that politics is the shadow cast on society by big business, and will remain so as long as power resides in business for private profit through private control of banking, land, industry, reinforced by command of the press agents, and other means of publicity and propaganda. Accordingly, reforms will not suffice. Fundamental social change is necessary to bring meaningful democracy. The new spirit of the age. The political system that is the subject of these critiques bears some resemblance to the initial design, though the framers would surely have been appalled by many subsequent developments, in particular the radical judicial activism that granted rights of persons to collectivist legal entities, corporations, rights extended far beyond those of persons of flesh and blood. In recent international economic arrangements, mislabeled free trade agreements. Each such step is a severe attack against classical liberal principles, democracy, and markets. The enormously powerful, immortal persons that have been created are furthermore required by law to suffer from moral deficiencies that we would regard as pathological among real people. A core principle of Anglo-American corporate law is that they must be dedicated single-mindedly to material self-interest. They are permitted to do good works, but only if these have a favorable impact on image, hence profit and market share. The courts have sometimes gone further. The Chancery Court of Delaware observed that contemporary courts recognize that unless corporations carry an increasing share of the burden of supporting charitable and educational causes, The business advantages now reposed in corporations by law may well prove to be unacceptable to the representatives of an aroused public. The powerful means of publicity and propaganda of which Dewey spoke